episode 8, and this week we talk about stake pool operations, what it takes to actually operate a Cardano stake pool, all the ins and outs. And I have Casey Gibson joining me on the episode to talk all about it. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Learn Cardano podcast, where we break down all the concepts of Cardano so you can explain it to that group of little old ladies down at the cafe. I'm your host, Peter Buey, and this week I'm speaking with Casey Gibson all about stake pool operations, everything you need to know in regards to actually operating a Cardano stake pool. There's plenty of content out there in regards to how to set one up, how to start a pool, how to register your metadata, etc., all those different things, but not much content in regards to what happens next. How do you upgrade it? How do you continuously maintain its performance, and so on and so on. This episode, we talk all about those different aspects, and Casey goes into detail in regards to quite a few things, and also leaves his top 5 tips in regards to operating a stake pool. So if you've ever thought about it, or if you have started a stake pool and you are wondering what happens next, make sure you tune into this podcast episode. This is for you. Now, if you're a beginner and you're not interested in setting up a stake pool, this will still educate you in regards to what stake pool operators have to do to ensure that the network is working correctly, everything is secure, and that your rewards for staking are delivered, making sure that those blocks are minted every single epoch, and for the slots that we as stake pool operators are assigned is very important to ensure that you as delegators get those particular rewards. So we talk all about that. Now, I do have a review to read here, and this one comes from Joe Fredo. Easy to follow, great start to a podcast. Even though it's a really technical subject, it isn't overwhelming. Unlike Reddit and other venues where people talk about cryptos, the podcast doesn't make a novice feel stupid or they're missing something really important. Looking forward to more episodes. And thank you, Joe, for that fabulous 5-star rating review. Now, if you are enjoying this podcast series, please do leave us a 5-star rating and review on the Apple Podcast Network. It is the biggest podcasting network out there, and it really helps with the discoverability of the podcast, ensuring that other people that are typing in Cardano or blockchain are finding our podcasts, and it really helps with the show. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into this week's news. The first news story for this week is the Cardano Foundation delegation that was removed from Pool CRO. Now, for those that don't know, the Cardano Foundation and Import Output Global do a delegation cycle every 3 months at the moment to help bootstrap small stake pools and get them up and running and attract new delegates. So the Cardano Foundation at the moment is revolving around a delegation of 15 million ADA, and the IOG is moving around delegations of 3.2 million ADA. Now, this particular stake pool received the Cardano Foundation delegation of 15 million and decided it was okay to hike up its fees to 99%, that's the variable fee, and a fixed fee of 3,400 as opposed to the average minimum ADA fixed fee of 340. Now, a lot of people and other stake pool operators saw this happening and saw the fees hike all the way up, brought it to the attention of the Cardano Foundation, and in a few days, the delegation was completely removed from that particular pool. The pool did put out a statement saying it wasn't breaking any of the rules, but technically they may have been. One of the requirements for the Cardano Foundation delegation is to have a reasonable fee between 0 and 5%, and considering that they hiked up the fees to 99%, it does break that particular rule. If you want to learn more about the delegation cycle of Cardano Foundation or IOG, I have put the links to them in the show notes, and you can find out more about how the delegation works, especially if you are a stake pool operator and are looking for a bootstrap delegation to get yourself up and running. I've also posted a link in regards to the statement that the pool put up in regards to how and why they decided to hike up the fees. It's an interesting argument, but it was also torn apart on Twitter and by many other people. So if you're interested, please do have a look at those links and see and read over why they decided to hike the fees. Now, in some other news, people are unfortunately being scammed. There is a particular video going around that people are falling for that states that if you send ADA to a particular address, Charles Hoskinson will double that and send it all back to you. And that is simply not true. No one will give you ADA for free. And I've seen on Twitter people sending 15,000 ADA and even more and completely losing all of their ADA, unable to get it back. Once you send it, it is gone. If someone hacks you, it is gone. Very unfortunate, and I've posted the links to the video that Charles Hoskinson did in regards to these scams so you are more aware of what's going on, and also the Twitter thread where I read about this, where someone had lost that 15,000 ADA. It's very unfortunate, but it's best to be aware of these issues, learn from other people's mistakes, and prepare yourself to ensure that you don't get scammed and don't lose out on your ADA. Make sure you keep everything safe and secure. Now, in probably the biggest news for this week, our stake pool has minted its first block. And I was absolutely over the moon when I saw this notification come through, and we've got the little badge and everything in regards to having minted that first block. I thought I had to wait even longer. So I was willing to wait 6-7 months for this to happen. But thank you so much to our delegates. Thank you so much to all the people that have helped market and push the pool forward. We could have not done this without you. We have finally minted that first block, and that is guaranteed rewards for our delegates at the moment. It is a huge relief to see that come through. It means that everything that we have done in regards to the setup and all that works. Everything ticks over, and there'll be more and more blocks coming. Whew, finally made it. Now last, I just want to do a little shout out to Linda Rowland, or CryptoFly777, who had her artwork showcased on Charles Hoskinson's fan mail video last week. It is an absolutely amazing portrait of Charles, looking quite superhero-ish. If you haven't seen it, check out his latest video and also CryptoFly777's Twitter account, and you'll be able to see the portrait of Charles there. Actually, I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can see it clearly. It's absolutely amazing. You can zoom in and see all of the detail on the poncho, on his hat, and even in his eyes. It's pretty well done. And I'm looking forward to seeing what else she comes up with. She's pretty talented. Okay, let's get into the main topic for this podcast episode. Now, in the previous podcast episodes, I did a narration style of presenting with the interviewee. This time I decided not to, and we're going straight into this interview with Casey Gibson. So Casey, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I've been chatting to you on Twitter for a little while now, and it's fun to actually meet you semi-virtually in person.
Yes.
Could you please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and where you're located?
So I'm a full stack developer in Brisbane, Australia. I've been working full-time for 7 to 8 years. Started as a multimedia design graduate. Prefer the creative side of computing. I've never been into the sort of low-level machine stuff. I prefer the higher-level creative side of things. Always love computers, particular hardware, benchmarking, overclocking, custom water cooling. I love being hands-on with the computer as well. Still working full-time while maintaining the pool but I'm also currently doing the Cardano Plutus Pioneer program. So right now I've got my hands full.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've still got to get through all my lectures for that too. So yeah, I've still got a bit to catch up on. So how did you get into crypto? When did you have that spark of interest into, I guess, Bitcoin? And how did you discover Cardano?
Yeah, well, Bitcoin was just one of those fascinating things that everyone was getting into, and I thought, well, I could do that as well. So I bought like a cheap $90 ASIC miner, one little tiny little USB ones you just plug in and let it do its thing. And I thought, oh, this is pretty cool, but it doesn't make you any money. Well, this is the time when it was making you nothing. So I started getting into the Ethereum mining about the 2017, 2018 mark when it was really starting to boom. Had multi-GPU setup, water cooling. Unfortunately, with the electricity costs in Australia, that wasn't very profitable for long, but it was enough to pay off a graphics card or two. So I was quite happy with that. I did look a little bit into Cardano, but it never really, at that point, didn't really take off for me. I looked into being a masternode, running a masternode for Dash, but their equivalent of a pledge was way too high compared to what I could afford, so I quickly abandoned that one. So I'd been following Cardano vaguely up until about the Shelley era.
And is that when you decided to start up your stake pool?
Yes, basically as soon as I heard about Shelley, because when I first heard about the Cardano testnet, they only opened it up to organizations that had employees, like quite a number of people behind it, and I didn't really go into it. But once Shelley came out, I'm like, oh, I can actually do this myself. So, and it's really up my my skill set in terms of doing. So I do full stack development.
Yeah.
Also, I love the hardware side of things and trying to optimize servers and trying to find its bottlenecks and the weak points and all that sort of thing. So I love the concept of Cardano. You don't have to put millions of dollars into the hardware. It is literally something that anyone, if you've got the technical skills, could actually do yourself.
So about when did you start up the stake pool then? So the Shelley era kicked in around when? And what is your stake pool actually called?
My stake pool is called Ada Ocean Australia. I registered that in 19th of August 2020. And just to get a little bit of a history behind it, the first block, I think actually registered about 208, the epoch for 208. I didn't get my first my first block until epoch 219. And that pulled in a few delegators. But then if you're not producing blocks that often, they kind of fell away. And I didn't actually produce my second block until epoch 230. Well,
you waited a bit.
I waited a bit. And I'll get to that a little bit later in terms of one of my top tips. But patience is really one of them. But once I got my second block, it was actually just before it that the Cardano Foundation had selected my pool to delegate with. And that was when the K parameter was at about the 150 mark. So they had delegated about 64 million ADA, which is
That's a lot.
It's a lot. I mean, I think to saturate the pool was in the 250, 260 mark. So it wasn't really right at the saturation point, but it was enough to be able to produce probably about 30, 40 blocks in epoch. So to be able to really prove that the pool itself can produce blocks and run very well. They were still delegating when the K parameter changed to 500, and they had adjusted their delegation accordingly. But once they had left, had about 316 million ADA delegated to the pool. So really grateful to the Cardano Foundation in terms of running that program, because it really helped prove that the pool can run, but it also helped to pull in some other delegators.
So I was looking into this on the weekend. Now, the Cardano Foundation delegation methodology is different to the IOHK one, isn't it? Is that correct?
I'm not actually entirely sure with the IOHK one. I've never actually looked into it because I've done the Cardano Foundation one, which
Yeah.
I didn't actually submit anything to. The only requirements was that you had to produce a block and you had to have a certain amount of pledge behind it. But since then, I haven't actually looked into any of the other programs that they've been running because I haven't actually needed it.
Yeah, and I don't think you actually fit the requirements anymore because you're way over the active stake. That's
Yes.
the maximum. So hence you haven't looked into it. But I do believe it's two separate things, and anyone that's running a stake pool should look at both, especially if they're in the early days. Do you know how you were actually selected for it? Was it completely random? You met the requirements and they just selected you?
I'm not entirely sure because they did change it a few times, but as far as I understood it, it was meant to be random. But I think they may have also been a little bit biased if you had a pool that had a reasonable purpose behind it. So at that point, I'd had the actually, we're going to talk about this later, I believe, with ADA tools. I actually had that running at that point, and I think that sort of may have drawn their attention a little bit.
All right, we'll get into that a little bit later. Now let's dig into your pool a little bit. Now you've got quite a few relays all set up in Australia, and this is a pretty cool setup. I've connected to maybe a couple of them, creating a little bit of a resource load for you. Could you explain to everyone a little bit how your pool is set up with the relays and the block producers or block producer?
So it's 100% Australian based. So all the pools servers are located in Australia. So we got servers in Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, and Brisbane. All of them have pretty much direct connections to the submarine cable network that goes out to all the other countries in the world. I can actually send you a link to that that you can put in later. It's actually pretty cool when you look at how many submarine networks there are in the world and where the locations are.
Yeah.
All of them except Melbourne are very close to those. Melbourne pretty much doesn't have anything near it. It's a bit down the bottom of the world. But yeah, so 100% Australian base, supporting Australian jobs, which is always going to go down well with people. So yeah, that's a rough setup that I've got.
So I've spoken to a lot of other pool operators, and that they swear that having their block producer, which may be situated in Australia, connected directly to a relay node, maybe in Frankfurt, is the ideal setup so that you have a closer connection to the rest of the network. Is that true? I know you've been doing this for a long time, and I have a feeling you don't think that's quite right.
No. So I wasn't actually part of the test net, unfortunately. However, from what I understand that I've been reading, initially the first block into a slot was the one that won it, which is where the slot battle comes into it. But from what I understand and from what I've read, that has changed because there was all this centralization around Europe and USA. So they changed it so it's going to favor the pool that has the lower amount of stake. So having your relays in another part of the world purely to try and gain more blocks or be the faster winning doesn't actually make sense. And in terms of financial means, it doesn't actually make sense even more because there's already people who have, I think last time I looked, there was about 2,000 relays in US and Europe combined. They control about half of the network. So you might as well just connect to someone else's relay through your own relay. Because in the end, it doesn't really matter from a technical point of view.
Yeah, good point. So is having more than one relay more of a benefit in regards to connecting to the network?
Absolutely. From a mathematical point of view, it does make sense. Because if you have a particular node or relay that can have 25 connections to it, and your block sends it to that relay, it can then connect to 25 external relays and propagate it to that. But 25 for me isn't enough. So if you have 4 relays, each connecting to 25 external relays, that's 100 external relays that your relays are connected to. So, and if those external relays each had 10, just 10 connected relays, you've pretty much propagated to half the network, and you've almost one jump away from propagating to the entire network. So in my mind, having not an insane amount of relays, but your chances of propagating to as many nodes as possible is a lot higher.
Yes, I see your point there. Now, what about cloud providers? Is there a benefit in regards to using one provider over another?
It depends on what you're actually wanting to do with it, really. I mean, there's a lot of DevOps people out there that go for a particular provider. But in terms of people starting out, I'd say go with a simple pricing structure. The issue with AWS in particular is that their pricing structure is kind of all over the place, and you can get charged for things that you're not even aware of, such as bandwidth. And one of the issues in particular, if you go for a typical EC2 setup, is that not only is the CPU frequency not very high, but also the storage IOPS is not very high. So in terms of Cardano, the main things that you're really looking for is the node startup and building the Cardano node from the source code. And those ones in particular are single-threaded, what I've noticed. So those would be favored in terms of a higher CPU clock rate. But EC2s also have reasonably low IOPS. And from benchmarking, they only have about 3,000 IOPS. And I prefer to have the 10,000 to the 30,000 IOPS range. DigitalOcean, as a comparison, their shared droplets have reasonably high CPU frequencies, but their IOPS also are incredibly high. They're at about the 75,000 mark, and you can go for the premium droplets, which are about 150,000 IOPS, which is way overkill for what we would be using. That's more in terms of if you're using an actual database. But their CPU frequencies, the higher range ones, would benefit a lot more when you're actually starting up your node and you're building it because of that single threadedness. But other providers out there like Linode and Hetzner, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a German one, Hetzner. But for out of Ocean Australia, I prefer Linode, mostly because they've got a technology. I think it's based on Red Hat, but it's live migration. So if there's an issue with the underlying server, they can move the virtual machine live to another server without any downtime. Now, that's the main thing I like about Linode, because I've had several emails when I started off with it saying that there was an issue with the underlying server, but there's nothing I need to do about it. They successfully migrated. It was more of just a heads up, just to double check everything's running. And I logged in. Yep, everything's fine. Didn't even notice it. So I thought that was absolutely brilliant.
That is pretty cool, considering that reliability and uptime is one of the key things in regards to running a stake pool. So having that transition from one server environment to another is really cool. I had no idea that existed.
The only other ones, in terms of Australia, Binary Lane, they're an Australian base hosting provider. They're actually reasonably cheap. In fact, they're a lot cheaper than DigitalOcean and AWS, and really good in terms of configuration. So if you're Australia-based or you want a server in Australia, Binary Lane is really good because they're the ones that I use for the Perth and Melbourne relays. But they've also got Brisbane and Sydney servers, so they're reasonably spread out across the world. Across Australia. But also for the Brisbane one, I've gone for a good old bare metal server that I've got in my home, just because why not?
Because you can, exactly.
Yes.
That's exactly what I did with my setup as well. I've just got the Raspberry Pi just set up in the other room, just churning away.
I've actually ordered a Raspberry Pi. I'm keen to see how it will go on it.
Yeah, let me know what you think. Like, I think it's going okay. Like, sometimes it kills my router and I have to restart it. But in regards to just itself operating, it seems okay. It takes a little while and a little effort to actually compile Cardano on there, but once you get it up and running, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a feeling that it would be the case. However, in terms of having a cheap backup node, I think it's there. Why not use it?
Yeah, I think I've got my other one, which is a backup here. See on the camera.
There you go.
Just in case something else happens. But yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
All right. Now, in some other important aspects around managing all of the nodes, it's the maintenance, the updates, and the upgrades for Cardano each time they bring out a new version. So recently we saw 1.226.1 come out, and that was a fairly large update. And then we saw the 0.2 come out a couple of weeks after to fix some issues there. How do you go about upgrading your nodes in all these little patch releases that come through?
Typically, I'll be very cautious about them unless the Cardano dev team actually says this is a priority, you need to get this done as soon as possible, because I prefer to let other people be guinea pigs for new ones that come out. So the advantage of having a number of relays is that you can update one, let it sit there for a few days, see if it behaves all right, upgrade your next relay, and then eventually get around to your block producer. But in terms of actually doing that maintenance, as long as you've done your looked up your slot schedule for that epoch and making sure that you're nowhere near, your downtime that you've calculated is well away from any predicted slots that you might be allocated, especially like a couple of hours easy, because you don't know if you might accidentally break something or you need to rebuild something. Give yourself a lot of time just in case that little glitch has happened.
Yeah.
But also the underlying server itself, as you mentioned with the Raspberry Pi, it can take a long time to build. And from what I've seen, as I mentioned earlier, single threads seem to play a key role in this. So if you have a server that has a very high CPU frequency, it typically will build a lot quicker. So if you know you're going to be down for a while, so that's, for example, with that last one where we had to do the DB rebuild or rescanning, with a lot of these providers, it can charge you for the hourly rate. So you could actually purchase a higher CPU rate for that hour, do your build, and then when you do your restart, just quickly drop it back down to your lower frequencies, what you were before. So that can help to minimize your downtime.
Yeah, cool. That's a really good tip. Now, in following on from that, how do you do backups? I know you're a big...
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, okay. Here we go. I know you mentioned this.
Absolutely love backups.
Yeah, like if an environment fails, you've corrupted something, how do you go about backing up your relays, your block producer, and I guess all your keys for your environment as well? What's your process there?
In terms of the block producer and the relay, so I've got a Sydney relay and a block producer relay within the same location. Both of those are backed up. The other ones I don't really worry about because if something happens to them, I've got other relays working for rebuild it. But the block producer and at least one relay need to have a backup. So if you need to quickly reverse something, let's say you've updated a node and it's gone all to pieces, your quickest way might be using that backup that you have. But your other most important thing is obviously your keys. And my policy has always been, if it doesn't exist in 3 places, it doesn't exist at all. So if you have your ADA wallet written down, for example, that's only in one actual location. You need to have 2 other ones to play it safe and 2 physical other locations. And if you have it as a paper backup, put it in a fireproof safe. Because the last thing you want is when your house is on fire, trying to run around trying to find that little piece of paper. It's not worth your life. Just put it in a fireproof safe. It doesn't have to be a thief-proof one. Just one of those little portfolio case ones. And it's going to be safe when there's a fire. You can just abandon it and know it's all right.
You dig through the ashes of your home afterwards trying to find it. But
exactly.
it should be there. Yeah.
Yes. So in terms of other backup good to do's is to have an encrypted USB drive, because this will allow you to be able to put your cold keys onto the encrypted USB drive and then give it to someone or leave it at work and know that no one can actually get to your cold keys. They're reasonably cheap. I mean, about $150, you can get a reasonably decent one that's approved by the US government. And the good thing with those as well is if you enter the password incorrectly 10 times, it erases itself. So you know that they can't do like a brute force attack or anything like that. But the other added benefit is that if you color code it, like put some spray paint on it or something like that, let's say bright red, then you know that that one on there has your cold keys and only to plug it into a computer that has never been attached to the internet or is not going to be ever attached to the internet again. So that way, even if you do plug it in accidentally and you decrypt it, I've just exposed everything to the live internet, potentially.
Yeah.
So if you just color code it, then you know that, okay, this one should only ever be plugged into a cold computer, effectively.
That's pretty useful. That's a good tip too. Thanks for that one. Now, I've got some quick fire questions here that were submitted from a couple of users. So hopefully you can answer these ones as well and clarify some of their understanding. So we got here, what is chain density? So we can see this appear in maybe GLive, one of the tools that you use to check if your node is up and running. So can you explain what chain density is?
So chain density is basically just a way to measure the health of the network. So you would have seen the term of a slot. A slot is just basically 1 second, and that correlates to an exact moment in time. So if I said we're at slot 100, we'd been exactly 100 seconds from the moment the system went live. So chain density is basically a way to actually determine whether a block was actually produced at a particular slot. And typically, a slot will be allocated to produce a block every 20 seconds. But if you or a pool misses that mark, then you have transactions that are potentially hanging or anything else that needs to be processed on the network, and the next block has to come and pick it up. So that's where chain density comes into it, because it actually gives you a reasonably accurate readout of whether pools are producing their blocks or not. So if you have a 5% chain density, a block should be produced every 20 seconds, and if that chain density falls below 5%, it means that pools are potentially down or they're not being managed properly. And if you really see that number dropping, then it could be a sign that maybe there's a server location down, or maybe there's internet problems in general. So, which is why I'm not really a big fan of all these people starting up their servers in the US and Germany and all that, because if you have a major outage and all that, then you're going to take a reasonable chunk out of the uptime of Cardano.
It's that whole decentralization thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so how are these slots allocated? This is another question that was submitted. So you spoke briefly about what they were. How are they allocated to the pools so that they can actually start minting blocks?
Okay, so as I said, a slot is a 1 second of time. And what your pool is actually doing in the background is every single slot, so every single second, it's running a function to actually determine whether you have the right to produce a block. And this function will take certain inputs and it will spit out certain outputs. But the main output that you're after is and this is a very simplified way of how it actually works. It's a lot more complex. You can go on forums and see how it really technically works. But it spits out a number, and if it's below a certain threshold, then you have the right to produce a block. And the main thing that really affects this number is your active stake that you have for that current epoch. And since this function is always going to be consistent, it's based on Haskell, as you would know, it's going to be a pure function. So whatever goes in will always be the exact same result that comes out, which is why about 1.5 days before epoch begins, you can actually calculate your entire slot schedule before the epoch has even started, because at that point we already know what the parameters are. All this script is really doing is just rapidly going through every single slot and calculating whether your pool has a threshold number below that threshold.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned there that you can check your logs in regards to if you're going to produce blocks in the next epoch. Can you tell our audience how that is done?
I can't remember the script that it was actually called. The one the one I'm currently using is from Pool Tool, but I have a feeling that may have been deprecated, and there's one for CN Tools, I think it is, that might be the favored one at the moment. I did try that and it crashed my block producer, so I haven't actually used it again. But yeah, as I said, basically all it really is doing is recreating what your block producer would be doing throughout the entire epoch, but it's doing it very rapidly, calculating or running this function every single slot and just trying to rapidly go through it and see if it meets that threshold, and then it can just spit out the result. So it's very handy for stake pool operators, because then we can do these fancy announcements before the epoch begins, saying, oh, we're going to be getting, well, we've been assigned these blocks. It doesn't mean we're going to get it, but we've been assigned them.
Yes, and hopefully attract some delegates at that point.
Yes.
So when you know you're going to produce all these blocks, let's jump on that pool and hopefully get them. But, there's a bit of that delay and lag, so some people don't realize that.
Yeah.
All right, so here's another question that was submitted, and this one's around slot battles, something we mentioned a little bit earlier. You mentioned that early in the podcast. What are slot battles?
Slot battles is basically when a slot has multiple pools assigned to it to produce a block. So since this function that runs every single second or every single slot is a mathematical equation, there is a chance that another pool will actually be assigned at the same time as you. And that's part of the design of the network. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I actually think we should actually have more slot battles, because if there is an issue with the one of the pools, then another pool can submit their block with it. But in particular with a slot battle, if two pools submit their blocks, it's not whoever submits their blocks the first and propagates the quickest. That threshold number that I was talking about earlier, like I said, this is a very simplified way of looking at it. But basically that number, if it's a lowered number, it's the one that is actually chosen to have that block. And as an example, I was looking at on the forums of how these actually work, and someone was actually analyzing that they had produced a block and it had propagated, but then their relay actually kicked their own block out and chose someone else's. And they were wondering, why is this? This is on my own relay. Why is it being kicked out? I was here first.
How dare you betray me?
Yes, which is a heartbreaking thing to see. So that's where that number comes into it, because another block came along and said, no, I've actually got a lower one here. I have more rights to this slot than you do. And that one, once again, a lower amount of stake actually increases your chances of winning that slot battle. Not guaranteed. I've had pools that are way bigger than me win a slot battle. It's just how the luck goes.
Interesting. All right. Now, this is a question from another pool operator as well. Now, what happens if you're allocated slots? So you're looking up the leader logs and you see that you've been allocated 5 slots. And the proc passes and you don't actually produce any. What has happened and how can you work this out?
Yes, so there's a number of, as we mentioned, a slot battle could actually have occurred. So in that situation, if you know exactly what slot that you're supposed to get it, you can actually look it up on a Cardano Explorer and try and find if another pool has produced a block during that slot. And if that case, it was a slot battle, there's nothing that you can actually do about it. One of the other things that you might need to look into would be the KES keys, because they rotate every 90 days. There have been some people who got caught out and forgot to update their KES key. So in that situation, it might take a while to actually figure out if that is the issue. You've also got other node certificates that may be out of sync for some reason, or maybe actually one of the things that I have seen previously is that people update the Cardano node and the CLI on their relays and block producers, but then they don't do it on their cold storage server. So they'll be trying to do these updates to their pools like the KES key and all that, but they're using an outdated version of Cardano node in the CLI, which can cause issues. But ultimately, the Cardano framework has been around for at least 6 months, ages. So if you're not producing those blocks when you know you should be, and you've looked into these main problems, go and look in the forums. There's always going to be someone who's either had the exact same problem, or there's going to be people out there that are willing to try and help you out. Or if you've got if you're using a script to run your pool, or if you're using a guide, they typically have like a Telegram channel where the people who actually run it in the same configuration as you can try and give you help along the way.
Yeah. It's somewhat embarrassing for some people to admit that they've missed these slots. It damages the reputation of the pool slightly, especially if you have a lot of delegates on there.
Yeah,
and,
it can damage
and also your skills.
Yes, but being honest is also more important, because if you're missing blocks and you're not owning up to it, then it's just not good luck, really.
Yeah, especially if it's epoch after epoch that you're missing slots and not minting
especially
blocks.
when you've announced them ahead of time.
Yeah,
If
definitely.
you don't say anything, it's going to act a bit odd.
Yeah. Okay, good point. All right, so we've gone through a lot of questions here, and you've explained a lot of things. Let's get to your top 5 tips for stake pool operators. What are the top 5 things you can tell people in regards to operating a pool or even starting a pool?
Okay, so as I hinted at a little bit earlier, patience is the main one. You may not get your first block or even your second block. It may take months. Doesn't mean that you're a bad pool operator. It just means that you haven't been lucky enough to actually get something. My first block, I got it when I had 86,000 ADA delegated to it, which is a lot lower number than what people are running at now and still not getting a block. I think my one was, and this is when the K parameter was at the 150 mark. So pool saturation was 260 million ADA. So I was extremely lucky to be able to get those 2 initial blocks. But be patient with it, keep at it. That's the first tip. Second tip would be more of a heads up, really. Be prepared to run your infrastructure for a year with no break even. When I started off, I was fully expecting not to even make any blocks for like 6 months, maybe a year. But I was kind of prepared to stick it out for a year just to say, hey, I tried it. If it failed, it failed. So definitely be prepared. I mean, you can always take shortcuts with your server infrastructure. So you have your block producer and a relay on cloud infrastructure. And as you pointed out earlier, just having like a Raspberry Pi or something at home or something like that as your sort of backup relay. So you can cut corners. I mean, ideally, not too many corners.
Yeah.
But don't go spending like $500 a month on infrastructure that you're not going to be getting back. I mean, you can if you want. Don't let me stop you. But it's not that you don't have to go and do it.
Yeah.
So that's the second tip. Be prepared to run your infrastructure for a year with no break even. Okay, so marketing would be tip number 3. Consider why someone would stake or want to stake with your pool. Actually get into the mindset of the delegator, actually figure out why they would actually want to stake with you. That can actually be quite helpful. And you look at these pools that runs on that are based on like memes or they're geeky. They only appeal to those certain types of people. It's not going to be appealing to everyone. So really consider what your pool is actually going to be if you're trying to get the most delegates to it. And also one thing as well, one tip that I got from someone was that don't name your business after your own name, because it's very hard to sell it later unless it's like very high end. So if you've created a pool with your own name, it's not the most professional sort of thing, because you also got to consider where your pool will be in 5 or 10 years. You look at Amazon; it wasn't named the Jeff Bezos. What I think his last name was Jeff Bezos. Yeah. It's not Jeff Bezos' company; it's Amazon. So you've got to consider what your pool is going to be like in 5 to 10 years, and start marketing it around that. So, number 3, marketing. A lot of people have found this out. Marketing is a must when you're doing stake pool operating. Number 4, run it like an actual business. So have a business plan or something that's actually going to be what your pool actually is. And because one of the things with businesses is that they fail within the first 2 years of actually going out on a venture. Stake pool operating is Cardno is literally $1 billion framework or system. We need to actually take it seriously and treat it like that. So run it. That's tip number 4. Run it like an actual business. Tip number 5, responsibility. So ADA Ocean Australia has 4.2 million ADA delegated to it, which is nearly $5 million US. I'm not entirely sure what the Australian equivalent is, probably about 6 million Australian dollars. But SPOs are responsible for all the delegators' 5% yearly return on ADA. As in, if you're running a pool, you are personally responsible for gaining the interest on someone else's money. And just to put that into perspective, ADA Ocean Australia at this point has returned about $300,000 US in rewards. Now, when you think about it that way, that's $300,000 of people's actual money. So you do need to take some responsibility in running your pool and running it the best that you can, because you are literally helping other people have a better life with their money. So those are my 5 top tips. Patience, be prepared to run your infrastructure for a year, marketing, run it like an actual business, and responsibility.
Casey, that was absolutely fantastic. I really hope everyone's taking notes and has written all that down and has really taken it on board. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that.
That's all right.
Now, last but not least, you mentioned a little bit earlier the little project that you're working on, which isn't that little. It's quite big now. And I've found myself staring at this hologram on your website for many, many hours. I've taken screenshots and posted it all over the place. adatools.io. Can you tell the audience a little bit about this, why you created it, what's it for, and how can people use it?
Yeah, so initially I wanted to create something that I thought would be very beneficial to everyone in terms of Cardno. There was already tools out there, but they're very orientated towards pool analyzing. I wanted a multi-tool for Cardno. And I really, like I mentioned earlier, I really like the creative side of being a full stack developer. So the first thing I thought of, well, how can you actually visualize the decentralization of Cardno? So that's where I decided to come. The first actual project was the hologram. It was its own standard product. It was just a website with just the hologram. And people absolutely loved it, which was an amazing thing to have when people really like your own creation. So that then shifted onto the actual adatools.io in terms of its full Cardno dashboard and /explorer. And since then, I've added the news section, pools, Twitter feeds. I thought that was a useful thing to see how active people's Twitter feeds were. Real-time block analyzer. It's not the greatest out there. Pool.pm, I think they are. They've got an absolutely fantastic real-time explorer, so check them out. But I don't know if anyone actually noticed it yet. I don't know if you found it yet, but the homepage has a Easter egg hidden on it.
Interesting.
So I hid that on there a while ago. I thought, oh, this is a nice little thing just to dump on there. And then there's other aspects. There's other aspects. It's just a little thing. It's nothing amazing, but I thought this was pretty cool.
Is it pretty obvious once you find it?
I'll give you a hint. It says time waster on it.
Okay.
When you see time waster, you'll know what it is.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to see if any of the audience listeners and viewers can actually find it.
I did actually put a tweet out a couple of months ago, or maybe 2 months ago, saying if anyone actually spots it. A number of people did actually find it, but I think the low number of replies meant they didn't find it. So some people find it, some people don't.
Okay, interesting.
But yeah, so in terms of the only other thing I really added, I thought would be beneficial, would be a pool health checker. It hasn't got every single thing in there to actually determine whether your pool is running healthy, but it does do basic things like determining whether your certificate hashes match up. It'll see if your relays are online. And it also connects to the Cardano Smash server, which is the one they use in their wallet to determine pool ranking. But it can actually determine if it finds any errors with your pool. So that was a good thing that I was able to sneak in before the Cardano Plutus program started, because I really wanted to get that one in before then, because I'm really busy with that at the moment. But there's also a testnet version of AdaTools.io, because at the time when I put it up, there was no other tool out there for testnet people to actually see what's actually happening. So I put that one up there for them. And just putting it out there, if you run a pool, please create a testnet. It's very beneficial because currently their chain density is quite low. I think it was around 3% last time I looked at it.
Ooh.
Might be rising a little bit. Obviously, I don't know how they deal with hundreds of people signing up to it because they've only got limited ADA. But if you are able to have the opportunity to create a testnet, then definitely do that.
Yeah, I remember when signing up to the testnet, they've got the faucet so you can withdraw ADA to your test wallet, but then they ask once you decommission it to send it back.
Yes.
I have a feeling a lot of people don't send it back.
Well, it's actually interesting because when they actually released their ADA tools on the testnet, there was a number of people actually saw it and they realized that they hadn't actually deregistered their pool. So there's actually a lot of ghost pools on there that are producing any blocks because it hasn't been maintained. And a lot of them have deleted their cold keys, so they can't physically return it. So that's a bit of an awkward one.
Yes, a little bit. I should probably check mine to see if I have. I believe I have. But anyway. All right, Casey, this has been absolutely fantastic. You're a wealth of information, and I will definitely have you back on the podcast to pinch a little bit more out of your brain and learn a little bit more. So thank you so much.
That's all right. I hope to help.
It definitely has. How can people find you and your pool?
So Twitter, we've got AdaOcean Australia on there. That's the main way to find it, or adaocean.com.au. That's what our website is. If you want to contact me at all, then Twitter is probably direct message or a tweet is probably the easiest way to get through to me. But yeah, on the website, there's other ways you can contact me if you want to, like Telegram or anything like that.
Great, fantastic. I think I first contacted you via Twitter and you're quite quick to respond. So if anyone else wants to bug Casey for any sort of information in regards to pool ops, I'm sure you can flood his Twitter inbox.
Oh, this is going to be interesting.
Awesome, Casey. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you for having me. I mean, I've listened to a few of your previous podcasts, and you've done a great job. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. I really hope everyone got something interesting and helpful out of that interview with Casey. I know it went for a little long, but there was a lot of content to cover, and we had to get through it all, and I just had to post it all. It was absolute gold. Now, there is also a YouTube version of this interview that is online on our YouTube channel, and you can get to that from the website as well on the show notes. If you have any questions for Casey, as we said, you can reach out to him on Twitter, but you can also leave a comment on the YouTube video where Casey will be responding to all those questions on there as well. Now, Casey is giving so much out here. He's also giving away an encrypted drive. So to enter this, there will be a little competition that you have to fill in. There'll be a pinned tweet, and all you have to do is jump on there and read the details, fill in the competition forms, and you'll be able to be in the draw to win this encrypted drive to store your seed phrase, your cold keys from your stake pool, whatever it may be. It's pretty generous of him. He'll be only posting this to someone in Australia, though, maybe over to New Zealand as well. The international shipping rates from Australia are astronomical at times and are extremely slow. So thank you so much, Casey, for providing that giveaway. Now, if you're not in Australia or New Zealand, we have another NFT prize to give away. It's called an NF Frog, or a 8-bit digital art frog that we collected the other week when it was announced and released. We're going to keep one, and we're going to give away the other. So there's two. I'll let the winner decide which one they want to take. One is a little bit rarer than the other, but you probably have to work it out which one it is. I'll post photos up of it, and you can decide if you're the winner or if you want to enter the draw, which frog you want. I have no idea what it's going to be worth. On sale, it might be worth a couple of hundred ADA, for example. So go ahead, enter the draw. If you're not going to win the encrypted drive, you'll be in the draw for the NFT. All right, I think I have covered everything I need to cover for this week. So until next time, everyone, please keep those seed phrases, your wallets, and your ADA safe and secure. And I'll catch you next time. Bye.